very much. I'm an architect, a practicing architect. My partner Sindile Gonyama is with me in the audience today. Thank you for joining me. So I speak not as a PhD or as a professor, but I speak about my experience as an architect working for the last 25 years in Africa. One of the challenging aspects of working in South Africa and in many parts of the developing world is that we face a significant wealth gap, a gap between those that are wealthy and those that are poor, especially in South Africa, where we face a double legacy of colonialism and many years of apartheid. What is a consequence is even to this day, we will find a significant gap between the wealthy and the poor, pretty much along the same lines as existed in colonial times and apartheid times. I'm interested in that, of course, and I'm interested, as an architect, I'm interested in land and the buildings that are located on that land, and I'm interested in the vehicle of land as a generator of economic transformation. But land in itself holds some basic value, but really the value that land holds is on the rights that one has over the land. Do you have a right to build a house? Do you have a right to build an apartment? Do you have a right to use it for a shopping center or a church or a place of business? And these rights are given and taken away and restricted by government, all spheres of government. Now I'm particularly interested in that and the work of a French economist, Thomas Piketty, who most of us would know. And he writes a very, very interesting book, Capital in the 21st Century. And basically he explains to us what we've all known before through rigorous looking at the data of the last 100 years at least, where he explains that those of us that derive our livelihoods from depending on capital and assets will tend to become more and more comfortable. And those of us that determine our livelihoods from earning a living through wages, whether they are digging sewers or working as a doctor, will tend to become less and less comfortable. That's very interesting, but you may not have heard of an American economist called Matthew Rognley, a young economist that was very impressed with Thomas Piketty's work and dissected it and looked at it and analyzed the data and said, well, actually, most of the division between those that have assets and those that don't have assets are actually drawn from real estate, drawn from property, drawn from land and buildings. This is a very interesting data for us as architects in the room who work day and night around real estate and adding value to real estate and land. I'd like to speak to you about my particular experience in Port Elizabeth, working with a site. A group of friends of mine and myself own this piece of land, and we've had to negotiate to get the right to do anything with the land. We've had to negotiate in South Africa 6 different pieces of legislation and local statutes and provincial statutes in dealing with the environment, dealing with heritage assets, dealing with national building regulations, dealing with zoning schemes, dealing with Department of Transport standards, how many cars you can park, dealing with restrictive conditions of title. The reason I mention this to you is because a simple piece of land like this would take us, and has taken us, 10 years to restore the rights that were taken away by the government by imposing these restrictions. Now, I'm not here to complain about the work of the architect. This is what we do. But I'm more interested in not the irritation factor of these land use right restrictions, but I'm interested in the impact that these land use right restrictions have on the ability to move towards a society that has more equal distribution of wealth. And there are 5 reasons I'm trying to argue to you, 5 reasons that land use right restrictions cause wealth inequality. And I want to speak to you about those 5 reasons to see whether you agree with me. Number 1, land use right restrictions have the tendency to entrench the status quo. What do I mean by that? In a situation like South Africa, where you have a wealth gap between those that had previously advantaged from colonialism and apartheid, land use rights which allow you to do certain things with the land. Even now, if you are a new entrant into the market and you acquire land, the rights to do anything valuable with the land are severely restricted by a complex myriad of land use right restrictions. Number 2, The second reason is it is very, very difficult under this regime of land use rights to mobilize sweat equity. And this is especially important in South Africa, where more than 25% of the population is unemployed. 25% of the population is not able to use a job in order to build wealth, is not able to draw wages or a salary to build wealth. One of the few assets that unemployed people would have would be the ability to mobilize sweat equity, to build your own house, to build your own store, to build your own investment, as had been done for thousands of years before colonialism in South Africa, where ordinary people for thousands of years were able to build wealth, and a wealth of knowledge passed down from generation to generation, how to use round pole construction, how to use thatch, how to use wattle and daub. All of that was curtailed and brought to an end with the introduction of the national building regulations in colonial times already, where essentially it became illegal to build your own structure, illegal therefore to create wealth for yourself and your family and the generations that you would have passed that asset down to. Now the third reason that I want to speak to you about is the mere existence of these regulations and controls lead to dissuasion. What I mean by that, people are motivated or demotivated to not do anything about the situation at all. They're intimidated by the complex language used in the land use right regulations. They're afraid they're going to lose their assets. They're afraid government's going to demolish their structure, as had been done in the past quite violently and is still being done today. People are dissuaded to invest what little income they may have in generating assets. The result is that people invest the little money they have in either poorly performing assets on the stock market or simply wasting that money in lifestyle investment. The fourth, and perhaps the biggest reason that I would want to speak about, is that the limitations on land use right, the restrictions on land use right, bear an very, very high cost, a very high administrative cost to try to remove. And the example that I'd like to mention is a big shopping center built outside the boundaries of Port Elizabeth on what was a very low value farmland. But because the investors were able to buy this farmland for very low and invest a lot of money into overcoming the administrative hurdles, expensive lawyers, expensive professionals, they were able to build very quickly, taking a few months, they were able to acquire the rights to build a R1 billion investment with hundreds of thousands of rands worth of shopping center investment. By contrast, the community that we've been working with for over 10 years in a location called Njoli Square, where over decades trade and entrepreneurship have developed around an intersection in a high density residential area. These people were not able and have still not been able to mobilize themselves in such a way as to change the land use rights in their favor. They may live there, but they don't have the rights, the land use rights, to be able to transform the land which they own into any form that could be used to attract the kind of investment that they would need to make them very, very wealthy for generations to come. Now this is clearly a problem. It's not that the legislation doesn't enable it, it is that the administrative cost of changing the rights that they have is unbearable for these communities to achieve, even with the assistance of local government. The fifth challenge that I'd like to put forward is that changes in land use right are simply happening too slowly to allow for disruptions to occur, or to allow for people to take advantage of the disruptions that occur. When I speak about disruptions, I speak about things that change our economy radically. So 1,000 years ago, or maybe less, our Port Elizabeth economy was disrupted by an agricultural economy brought by the Xhosa-speaking people, the hunter-gatherers there, where their economy was disrupted by agriculture. But more recently, Port Elizabeth today is disrupted by technological advancements in communications and Uber, Airbnb. All of these have an impact on real estate, but our regulations, our zoning schemes cannot move fast enough to allow these changes to happen, and so therefore new entrants into the market cannot take advantage and cannot take advantage of the opportunities to create wealth for themselves and their families. But if any of us had to challenge in the cities that we come from, the officials, asking them, why are these land use right restrictions in place? Why can I not do what I want to on the land that I own? the answer is generally, well, if everybody could do what they wanted, there would be chaos. It would end up in some crazy environment that would be unbearable to live in. Show me the science, I say to them. I challenge any one of you, and I've looked myself, I don't find any science in any of the literature linking a lack of land use right controls with urban chaos. I don't see our cities descending into the urban dystopia of District 9, the best movie ever made. I don't see any of the evidence of toilets not flushing because land use rights aren't in place. In fact, when I look at the science, I find the city of Houston, I find other cities throughout the world which have little or no planning, little or no zoning at all, which are fantastic, livable human environments. So my challenge is to find the science. Now, in as much as I say I'm a practicing architect, I'm very interested in this question, and I would want to, out of discussion at this conference, find out whether we shouldn't pursue the question of, is there some science, in fact, to show that there's a link between wealth inequality and over-restrictive land use right conditions. Thank you very much. I haven't read my paper, but if you do want to read my paper, please go to my blog and read it there. It's a little bit too long to represent it in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
So is there any question or comments? Please.
Tim, you showed us some analysis that you brought from the north, from the west, but in South Africa, probably similar with my country, Indonesia, some data you just cannot rely on, like the rate of employment, or even the number of population who live in a house. So how you try to cope with this in South Africa to get more real, clear, reliable data? That's the question.
I think I am agreeing with you in your statement, in that I think research in this field is lacking. Research in this field, especially in my local urban environment, is lacking in terms of household data, how poor are the people, and how would their poverty, how would their levels of wealth be impacted on specifically by the removal or the easing of land use rights. The data is not as well formulated in many developing countries, and I can see a gap in the research market for that.
Please, I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but my understanding of representation is that you think areas that have buildings or structures that are built with the freedom of will of the owner, of the land property owner, have more advantages or are better than those that are built in areas where there are land regulations, where there's a system to follow. Is that right, or did I misquote you?
No, you misquoted me. I do believe, though, that the chances of us ending up with bad buildings because we don't have planning are overstated by those that defend the complex planning and zoning regulations put in place. What I'm arguing is I don't find the science anywhere in the literature that links an absence of planning and absence of zoning to urban chaos. I don't see that linkage. I don't think a freedom to do what you want to on any piece of land automatically leads to a good building. In the same way, I can see that planning and zoning restrictions also do not automatically lead to a good building.
I just want to say that it's really interesting to me that an architect that is interested in the rights of people. You know, it's not very common to have this type of discussion and this type of events. You know, so thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And I know that wasn't a question, but I want to use it to try to answer, because I think why architects should be interested in this subject is very important. Architects have an intricate knowledge and an intricate understanding on a day-to-day basis how the limitation and the restriction on land use rights impact on the potential for development. We see it every day, but I see architects every day standing back from the discussion and saying, no, somebody else should please deal with this. Let the planners deal with this. Let the politicians deal with this. My argument to us in this audience as architects is that there's a real place for us to deal with and for us to find our voice in this arena.
And maybe the congratulations is also to the people that chose your paper, you know, because it's not very common either, right? So it's not a subject that is interesting, you know, to be discussed in a